All right. How you feeling? We doing okay? If you're with me, say I'm with you. One more time. If you're with me, say I'm with you. All right, we're getting better. So we have you're really in for a treat for this next portion of our agenda. I'm going to introduce Tony Bond, who will then introduce his special guest with the special introduction. But this part right here where we say, greatness is within reach. The title of this presentation, Innovation Within Reach, and using your high trust culture to as a key to radical collaboration is something that each and every one of us can take something from and put into our organization immediately. All right, so I'm going to introduce Tony. Tony Bond is our Executive Vice President and our Chief Innovation Officer at Great Place to Work. And he's a key contributor and a catalyst for our organization's cultural transformation work. In his work, he makes sure that our Great Place to Work models and our core transformation methodology is constantly leveraging and integrating the newest approaches based on what our clients' insights and on developments in the culture transformation space at large. Tony's a strategic thinker and a proactive listener, and he's adept at using systems thinking's approach to affect positive change at the organization, the team, and the individual level. His eye for detail and his talent for thinking outside the box have enabled him to help companies solve very complex, entrenched issues with innovative approaches. And he's also able to leverage his corporate experience in leading complex business units in sales, marketing, human resources, operations, and finance to help them address today's complex business problems. Tony is accomplished. He holds a master's degree in positive organizational development from Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio, and he's also a certified executive coach. He's skilled at using all of these methodologies, including design thinking and integrative thinking, to drive innovation in organizations that we work with. And one of the special things that I appreciate about Tony is that he's able to provide the right perspective at the right time, all with the purpose of uncovering the need for empathy that we need to have for our employees and for our situation as business leaders. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tony Bond to the stage. You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I thought at first Julian was introducing me, but then the further he went along, I'm like, I don't know this guy that he's talking about. It has nothing to do with me. Good morning, everyone. It was exciting to hear Lori's part, and I will say we're going to talk about innovation, and before we do that, I want to introduce our special guest. And so with me is Ruth. Ruth is right up front. Ruth, will you stand up for a second so you can see you? Everybody give Ruth a hand because Ruth is going to introduce herself further after we get started. But a little bit about Ruth. Ruth is a director at AT&T, the Foundry. And so in other words, the innovation lab at AT&T. She gets to do all the neat stuff that makes AT&T such an innovative company. And if you ever visit their corporate office, it's amazing the things they're working on, whether it's wearable technology or the next phase of what they do today, making it even better. And so Ruth and her team is really responsible for testing those things, coming up with those ideas and bringing it to the larger organization. So we're going to partner today. I'm going to share some fundamental things around culture that enables you to be an innovative organization. Most of what Lori shared with you is really a part of what I'm going to share with you. Because in essence, my hypothesis is that being a great place to work also creates an innovative company. I mean, they run hand in hand. And so you'll see some redundancy, but it's important for us to sort of drive the message home. A little bit about me. Julian didn't know this, but I started in a long corporate background, spent a lot of time in corporate finance. So a lot of my slides are going to have graphs, numbers, versus Ruth will have very innovative slides, pictures, and visuals. And it's just hard for me to get that out of my system, so I feel like I have to show you some graphs and numbers. So I apologize up front. It's exciting to be a part of a Great Place to Work. Really, my background in corporate finance, I was like the guy who was always asking, what if? What if we did this, or what if we did that? And I would get a response, just stick to the plan. Just stop asking what if questions so much. And lo and behold, I get a chance now where I can start asking those what if questions. And so we're going to spend some time. I'm going to communicate some things to you. Ruth is going to come up, and we'll open it up later for questions. So let's get started by really talking about Great Place to Work. You may have seen this, and I'm not sure if you have gotten a chance to really sink this in. But what does it mean to be a great place to work? And it really starts with relationships. We know that these relationships have to be strong across the organization. Why is this important to innovation? Because if we're not having strong collaboration across the organization, it's very hard for us to innovate. So it's about building those strong relationships. Number two is about great leaders. And what we mean about great leaders when it comes to innovation is leaders that really have to have the right mindset, that they're not responsible for doing it all, that there's a lot of talent in the organization, and if you can tap into that talent, that's how you innovate. And then last but not least, it's all about business performance, because we know that it's a good thing to have a great place to work, to treat people the right way. It's a great thing to have this collaborative organization, but in the end, if you're not getting business results, then you're really not fulfilling your mission. So we think in terms of those three things: strong relationships, a leader that really understands what it means to be an innovative leader, and then keeping our eye on business results. Because we want ideas to flow, we want all these creativity within the organization, but it has to be aligned with our strategic direction. So that's what we mean by being a great place to work. You've seen this as well, but if you look at this 2x2 quadrant, really the top right quadrant is where we want to be. We want to have a high trust culture, but we also want to drive business performance. So when we think in terms of innovation, all of our activity really needs to put us in that top right quadrant. We need to treat people the right way. We need to lead them the right way, but we also have to get business results. So it's all, in the end, it's all about driving business results. So take a look at this list. Fast Company in 2015, close of 2015, identified what they felt would be the 5 major business challenges for this year. And if you look at this list, how many of these really fall into culture in the conversations we're having about Great Place to Work? Almost all of them, right? So when you think in terms of innovation, diversity and inclusion has always been important. But we can't innovate if we're not getting ideas across the organization from all different groups. And it's no longer an HR conversation, but it's more about a business level conversation around diversity and inclusion. We also know even the physical environment contributes. The redesign of the physical environment fosters collaboration. And so that's a part of innovation as well. This whole new management dynamics, the way they describe that is that now the relationship between employees and managers needs to be something that's measured on a constant basis. So it's almost real-time feedback as a leader. I need to know how I'm showing up and how my behaviors are impacting people. And you'll see later on some of the key behaviors that are going to drive innovation within an organization. So here's a first of my boring charts, but this one is really studied by the Boston Consulting Group. So for the last 10 years, they've been measuring the importance of innovation in the business environment. So they survey business leaders and ask that question: how important is innovation in your business environment? So I'm going to see a show of hands. Raise your hand that if your values or something within your corporate statement or your guiding principles has something to do with innovation. Okay, so quite a few of you. So you're right on track. So if it isn't there, you may want to consider integrating it there, because what they're finding in the study is that 79% of the respondents say that it's either their top priority or within the top 3 priorities. So innovation is very important. If we don't innovate, we can't compete going forward. So know that that's a really strong business priority. What do we mean by innovation? And it's so, I'll tell you a story. I actually was going to put a slide in here. I decided to pull it out. But our kids went to a Kanye West concert. They wanted me to buy them tickets. Now, I would never go. But our son comes back and he said, "Dad, that was so innovative." And when he said innovative, it sparked my interest. I'm like, "What do you mean by innovative?" And he said, "Well, there was a stage, a floating stage, and it moved around. And at one point, we're on the floor and the stage is above our heads." And I'm thinking, that's a new idea. I'm not sure if it's innovative. Because in our term, innovative needs to be new but also useful. I'm not sure how useful it is having a stage above your head. The other thing I noticed is living in San Francisco, there's a place right around the corner, Ministry of Supply. Has anyone heard of the company, Ministry of Supply? Okay, so you kind of get it. If you don't know about them, they make high-tech clothing. And one of their founders, actually a business suit that they designed, he ran in the marathon with this business suit on. And I'm thinking, that's a new idea, but that's also a very useful idea, because we work out and we can just go from the office to work out without any problems. So when we talk about innovation, it has to be new ideas, but those ideas have to be useful. So if we're thinking about how can we solicit input from employees, it's great to solicit those ideas, but they have to be tied to something we're trying to achieve as an organization. Okay. This is a list of not small, medium-sized companies, but large companies. And the reason we put these up is because if you think about the companies that are often recognized as great places to work, they're also recognized as some of the most innovative companies in the country. Case in point are these companies. Either through Boston Consulting Group or Fast Company, they were all listed as the top innovative companies in the world. And so building that strong culture, again, goes hand in hand with creating an innovative organization. I don't know if many of you are using our Trust Index survey, but this is kind of what we consider to be an innovation index. And the reason we put this together is because we heard so much information out there about researchers, academics exploring innovation, not from a systems and a technology perspective, but more from a cultural perspective. So the question is, what are the things that need to be in place within your culture that can drive innovation? We mapped all of that research and data back to the statements that we asked in our survey, our Trust Index survey. And what we found that there was a really, really close fit. So these are examples of some of the surveys statements that we believe are tied closely to innovation. Number one is showing appreciation for extra effort. It's very unlikely that I'm going to share ideas and step up and explore things if I'm not being shown appreciation for the things I do every single day. You also have this whole statement around management recognizing mistakes as just a part of doing business. If there's not a tolerance for mistakes, it's very unlikely that I'm going to try things. I'm not going to explore things. Also, you see that management genuinely seeks ideas and suggestions. That's part of leading innovation, is I have to, as a leader, always seek ideas from people. You also want to involve people in the decisions being made, and then also you have the spirit of collaboration. So what you have here is the 150 small, medium-sized workplaces, and this is how they score on those statements. In other words, people are often or almost always experiencing these things in the first column, versus the people who are contenders for the 100 best, 150 best, but didn't win. Those are still really strong companies. So in essence, what we're seeing is that these great places to work are showing up as being very innovative, and the reason they are being innovative is because they're laying the foundation. They're creating the framework within their culture. Last of the charts I think I'll be showing you. And so two things need to be in place to drive innovation. Number one is, as an individual, I have to be inspired to go above and beyond, to give ideas. There has to be some personal inspiration that's inside of me. On the other side is I have to be really connected to the organization. So not only do I have to have ideas, but I have to really be in tune with what's happening in the organization and want to contribute from that perspective. So what does that look like? Here are some prototypes. And so if we look at our research, you kind of create these prototypes of how employees may show up in your organization and how that either contributes or not to innovation. The bottom right quadrant is someone who's very comfortable. So I may ask the question, things are fine here, why do we need to change anything? Any of you have people in your organization that kind of have that mindset? It's okay to raise your hand. Okay. So it's very unlikely that we're going to get innovative ideas from those folks. They're very comfortable with the status quo. Just above that, in the top left quadrant, you have these folks who are so focused on what they're doing. They're high achievers, but they're not connected to the organization overall. So it's hard to move them from the things that are in front of them. They're like really striving to succeed in what's in front of them, but they're not connected to the organization. So therefore, it's very difficult for them to plug in. The bottom right quadrant is equally challenging because you have people that have all these wonderful ideas. We could do that, we could do this, but they're not really interested in being the one that actually executes on those ideas. So what we find is that this building a strong culture lands you in the top right quadrant. You have people that are really connected to the organization, understands where the organization is headed, and they're also inspired to give ideas and suggestions to help the organization move forward. And the reason they're inspired is because of the climate or the atmosphere that leaders are creating. You know, the behaviors that leaders exhibit every single day inspires me to want to contribute and be connected to the organization. So in essence, it's really about culture. The strong culture really builds the foundation for you to innovate. So what are some of the enablers? Scott Brandon, he's the executive director of the Lincoln Institute, and he's made a lifetime of trying to bring art to education, helping students and teachers imagine and be more creative. And so he has this continuum that I think really sums it up. It sort of shapes the mindset that you need from innovation. So it all starts with imagination. And if you're interested in his work, he has a book that's called Imagination First. So it starts with imagination. So if you can somehow unlock the imagination within your organization, create time for people to daydream, sort of wander, think about things and how they can be done differently, that imagination sparks creativity. And from that creativity, some things end up being innovative. But it all starts with the imagination. So one of your responsibilities as a leader is to figure out how can we create an atmosphere where people can imagine things, can move away from their heads down and look up at times and sort of see the full spectrum and come up with some ideas. What are these innovative leaders? We talked about, or at least I mentioned some things about leaders. Who's the guy on the right? You guys know who that is? Edison, exactly. Has anyone gone to his lab or seen any of his labs? Okay. Very interesting, and I have a photo next that will show you what a lab looks like. But there's this misconception that being an innovative company starts with having a Steve Jobs, who's a creative guy and is driving all these great ideas. Or you have someone like a Scott Plank at Under Armour, who's creative and has all these ideas. But there's a book that's called Collective Genius. Linda Hill from Harvard Business School co-wrote it with some others. And it's all about how leaders need to show up to drive innovation. And I love this quote because it's more about, in her opinion, leaders setting the context, the climate, the conditions that other people can innovate. It's not necessarily the leader leading things when it comes to innovation. So rather than it being this one man coming up with the brilliant ideas, if you visit the Edison lab, you'll see that it's a very collaborative workspace. There are a lot of space for other people to contribute ideas. So first and foremost is to have the right mindset. What are my responsibilities as a leader in driving innovation? Okay. I put this up, and I run the risk because we're in Austin, Texas, and there's some really good Mexican food here. You may not consider this to be on par. But here's the CEO of Taco Bell. Taco Bell is ranked as one of the most innovative companies in the US. And look at his stance on innovation. He's saying that it's really not about me at all. Really, my job is to kind of seek where those ideas are and encourage those ideas to move forward. So again, if we're thinking about unleashing innovation or innovation within reach, it starts with the leaders having the right mindset and understanding what my role is as being a leader within an innovative culture. I also love this quote. And I have a story. If I have time, I'll share a story with you. And it really summed up to being this whole shepherd idea. But you can see here that Nelson Mandela speaks very well about what a leader is from an innovative perspective. So it's really finding those nimble people who have those ideas and getting behind them. Others will get behind them as well. And in essence, you're really sort of driving things as a leader, but you're leading from behind. I love that sort of analogy of a shepherd. Because really, you think in terms of innovation, I need to help shepherd ideas and shepherd people to the right place so that those ideas can become a way of moving forward. I want to share these three things. So Lori shared a lot about culture, a lot about the fundamental things that drive a strong culture. And out of all the things that we look at and we measure, here are three key takeaways that I believe that can really help you if you want to see how innovative are we. Are we on course to innovating? The first one would be, what do we do to continuously get ideas from people within this trust-based culture? So I need a systematic and a continuous way of getting ideas from people. I also need to make sure that I'm creating these conditions of collaboration. So ask yourselves, how collaborative is our workforce? And I don't just mean teams collaborating with each other, because if you think about how things are structured functionally, there's a tendency for us to do something here in sales, hand it over the fence to someone else. There's a lot of handing over the things across the fence. And what happens is, if you can collaborate across those teams, it's the space in between those functions that create the opportunity to really innovate. So if you want to foster an innovative culture, look for ways to bring people together across functionally. And then last but not least is the appetite for risk. It's okay to fail. As long as you're trying something with the right spirit, the right intent, that's going to help you innovate. So what we're going to do is sort of double-click, go a little bit deeper on these, and then in the end, after I'm done, Ruth is going to come up and share some really real-world examples of what does it look like within an organization that's really striving for innovation, and what does it look like when people are working together in this way. So let's take a look at the very first one. The pie charts are really illustrate the difference between the winners and non-winners. So when I look at this statement, management generally seeks ideas, you can see in the blue that at 90% of the time, people feel like often or almost always that's the case in these best companies to work for. That's the key to driving innovation, because I have to find those ideas as a leader. What does it look like? What's some examples? Here's a company, American Transmission Company. And so they're a small company, but simple things that they do to really create this atmosphere of sharing ideas, starting with having executive sponsors. So there's executive sponsors across the organization, and they are really in tune to figuring out how can I help employees that have ideas out there. They also have this view that employees are industry experts. That's where the knowledge is. We go there. It's not about leadership having all the knowledge, but the employees are the industry experts. And then last but not least, you can see that they don't get tripped up over title. Title means very little there. So if I have some ideas, there's not this bureaucracy or hierarchy that gets in the way of those ideas being shared. Everyone's equal when it comes to sharing ideas. The second piece that I want to share with you is really around cooperation. And you can see the difference in the winners and non-winners. So there's a spirit of cooperation across the organization. Very important. What does that show? What does it look like? I'm going to skip the slide, but I'm going to go to this one. Google actually worked with Deloitte to measure the impact, the financial impact of collaboration in Australia. Now, I would say these results are very similar in the US. But what they found was that $46 billion per year came from these companies that really had collaboration at the core. It was the essence of how they operate. There was another like $9 billion at risk. If companies would only step up their efforts to collaborate, you could have $9 billion a year additional coming to the Australian business world just by the fierce fact of collaborating. Okay? So collaboration is really important. They also found that companies are 5 times more likely to increase employment if they're a collaborative culture. They're also 2 times more likely to be profitable and 2 times more likely to outgrow the competitors, strictly by the fact that they're measuring to the extent that these companies collaborate. So what does that look like at a great place? Sage Ruby, 30-minute meetings they have. These meetings are very simple. We stop, we pause, we ask the question, what are some aha moments that we've discovered individually? And then what are some issues or topics of interest that we have that we can talk about as a group? And then last but not least, they look at the question of what are some best practices, things that I'm learning that's making my work a lot easier that I can share with others? So it's not just, innovation is not just things that show up on the outside, but it's also how we work together internally. And then this whole idea about management making mistakes, quickly show you the difference in winners and non-winners, and then show you an example here. If you're familiar with HubSpot, I would encourage you to look up or listen to some things on Katie Burke. She's the VP of Culture and Experience at HubSpot. And she came up with a culture code, which is really the manifesto they use for their culture. And you can see how they've really taken the fear of making mistakes out of their culture. It's summed up very simple. What is the policy? Use good judgment. And so they don't want to create policies for just a few who are making mistakes. So these are examples of those 3 areas that really drive innovation in these particular organizations. Okay. So, and to sum this up, as leaders, let's think in terms of being a shepherd of ideas and people. We also want to create this trust-based idea exchange. We want to make sure that we're creating opportunities for people to collaborate. And then last but not least, how can we build this appetite for risk-taking? Those are easy things you can use as a litmus test for your culture to see how well can we drive innovation. So with that, I'd like to bring Ruth up. And Ruth is going to tell you a little bit more about her. She has a really interesting background, doing some great work with AT&T, and also share with you kind of the whole ecosystem of how you can think in terms of being a part of that. So Please join me in giving Ruth a hand.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Great Place to Work, for inviting me to be here. In being invited here, I also would like to share that Great Place to Work is on the journey with AT&T into cultural transformation. So this is really exciting because the Foundry is one strategy towards moving our culture forward, but Great Place to Work is really a part of the entire strategy because we're one hand connected to this large body of a company. If you don't know, AT&T is over 130 years old. We have 300,000 employees. There's a lot more numbers I could share with you about our revenue and our different segments, but if you think about the wireless, the wireline, meaning the internet in your home, fiber, digital life. We have an entertainment group now. If you haven't heard, we acquired DirecTV. We have Mexican telecoms. We have a presence in Latin America. This is an expansive and exciting business, but also a very large one. And so it's hard to impact that culture and have some uniformity and to move it forward. But the Foundry is one symbol, and I would say a prototype of what AT&T can be and hopefully will be in the future. So let me share a little bit about myself. I'm very excited to be talking to a group of HR and development professionals in particular. So I'm going to share this story a little differently. I remember when I was in college, I went to USC. I don't know if there's any Trojans here, but my professor saying, someday the job you have is not going to be something that exists today. And I feel very grateful that I'm a living example of that. So let me share with you 3 experiences that I've had in my career that's really shaped my preparedness to be, as Tony said, an innovation leader or shepherd. And you'll see this kind of weave throughout how this impacts, and it has impacts on my hiring. So hopefully this is helpful to you as well. So this is a picture of a band called the Soul Rebels. I lived in New Orleans a little bit after Hurricane Katrina, and part of what I learned there was that being an entrepreneur required a different mindset than being a business leader. And when these companies, and they were not necessarily the founders, but they were the leaders of their companies, had to change their mindset from how do I start my business over, how do I understand who my market is, how do I create new product lines now that it's been a few years since my company was shut down. It's a totally different skill set to start something from the ground up versus to keep something moving, right? So I experienced that firsthand in building business plans and pitching for funding with these startups. So have any of you heard of this term, the change maker? Raise your hand if you've heard of that term, change maker. So I call this having an inner rebel, and maybe it's also called being an innovation leader shepherd. So this is a band called the Soul Rebels, and that's where I think that my inner rebel and innovator came out was through that experience. The second experience is when I started at AT&T, I came out through their post-MBA leadership program, and they require you, so there's 30 post-business school grads that are put in frontline positions. And these frontline positions are really what our company is all about. They're the front-facing, customer-oriented positions. So I was literally driving an F-150 around Oakland and Berkeley, California, going into customers' homes, wearing a badge, and frankly, sometimes not being treated like a human, and definitely not like someone who graduated from college. So it was really interesting having that experience, and also I understood the pressures of this dashboard mentality that is driven through our company over and over because we have metrics that these technicians need to hit, as well as silos that these technicians and also dispatchers and different people trying to work together across AT&T are really experiencing. So experiencing that front line really helped shape my experience. And also I got to experience a little bit of I'm not sure if any of you have come up against this, but okay, I want you to innovate 10% of the time, I want you to try something new, but also keep your dashboard green, right? And that really helped me understand why there was a need for the Foundry as well. Lastly, having a global mindset. And I don't just mean passports, stamps, all of that, flights. I mean really being open to diversity. Our tagline is where ideas are made. How are you going to be open to new ideas if you don't understand the importance of diversity and you can't jump on opportunities and really listen to people? So this is an important element that I think. So again, having real entrepreneurial experience, frontline experience in your company, and a global mindset. Okay, so the AT&T Foundry. Tony gave a little background, which saves me some time, but essentially we're tasked to bring in fresh ideas into the company. And we have a legacy of kind of looking down and in for a lot of our ideas. And we're partnering with innovators, with developers, with regulators, and startups as well, and actually a lot of big companies. So our innovation centers, we have 5. We have one in Palo Alto, Israel, near our headquarters in Atlanta and Plano. We just opened one up on Connected Healthcare in Houston. These are all sponsored by our biggest vendors like Ericsson, Cisco, Amdocs, and Nokia, because they're invested in our journey. Our future is their future. So this is an important component of the Foundry. Perception is essential in the innovation ecosystem. So this is where I work. And like I said, it's a prototype, and I'll talk a little bit more about this space in a bit. And AT&T has a legacy of transformation. So we've, like I said, 130 years. This is what I call the first open workplace, right? But we've come a long way from here, and we really have a big ship to turn. One of our favorite quotes that we turn to in the Foundry, our competitors are not just Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. There are innovators outside our walls that have a tolerance for risk and are really just jumping into action. And at a lot of corporations, you spend months preparing for the meeting, preparing the PowerPoint decks. I'm sure we've all been in that situation. And we can't be doing that when our competitors are already putting products out into the market. A little bit more about innovation centers. So these are some reasons why organizations open up innovation centers. In particular, for AT&T, we created our innovation center for many of these reasons, but to engage the ecosystem, to have an impact on our business, and that means bring in new customer experiences and ideas, and to evolve the company culture. So just the sheer existence of the Foundry creates employee pride and allows employees to think in a new and different way. So when they hear our approach, they often ask, how can I do the same? How can I replicate that within my business unit? How can I tap into the ecosystem the way the Foundry does? And just driving this new way of thinking as an example is having an immediate impact into our company. A little bit about Silicon Valley and why we connect with these different innovation hubs. A third of the venture investment comes out of Silicon Valley, but it's not just about the investment. It's really about the culture. So Silicon Valley is characterized by play, by creation, and by collaboration. And so we really want to tap into this. And so by neighboring with this culture, it's really helping us infuse that into our Foundry culture. So if we didn't have, we often struggle with this, where sometimes by working with the business, we also risk the business having an influence on our own culture. So neighboring within Silicon Valley and places like Israel really allows us to let our neighbors' culture seep into our own. Engaging with the ecosystem, very important point. Like I said, we're plugging in so that we can tap into the new ideas and understand new approaches and ways of developing products. One way we do this is through, have any of you heard of the D School, the Stanford D School, User-Centered Design? Okay, this is about not just moving forward on a plan. This is about just talking to a few customers about what they're looking for in a new product. And that simple action and simple approach has such a great impact. Many times we go down one line of business without talking to anyone, sharing any product information, getting any feedback, and all of a sudden we're not meeting the needs of our customers. So everyone's curious about innovation. I told Tony I have one chart in my slide, and this is it. This is the Google searches for innovation in the past 10 years. So obviously it's on the rise. And so I like to say there's a lot of faux innovation out there. Like Tony was talking about the Kanye West concert. So how do you really know that there's an authentic, innovative culture, brand, activity within a company? So I came up with these 9 indicators for innovation. And typically, I talk about this in terms of brand and business. So I'm excited to share this a little bit differently and really highlight some of the cultural examples here. So space, open and flexible. Like I said, we are a prototype for what the company can be. And literally having open space removes the hierarchy. We have areas that are flexible. So one day it's for a group of a team to meet together. The next day it's for visitors. And then all of a sudden it's a demo space and we're experimenting with VR or other new technologies, or we create a connected experience within our foundries. So our space really represents the action and the kind of culture we want to have. When we opened the foundries 5 years ago, this was the only space that looked like this. Now we have a Workplace 2020 initiative that is spread all over the company. People. So we are a frontline experiential part of the company. And it is really important that every person be able to handle both ambiguity and be able to operate within the structure of our company. That is not something everyone can do. So I always ask people when they interview for the Foundry, how do you add value in an ambiguous environment? There is no roadmap for innovation. How do you seize those opportunities and bring value into the company? And this is not something everyone could do, but it's really what the world requires today. So it's a different type of environment. And we really say that we engineer serendipity. So we try and create opportunities for the outside and the inside to meet. And it requires a certain type of person to be able to put those pieces together and build and be flexible and agile and move quickly. Culture. So this is the how we do things here. We encourage everyone to be a rebel, and we really support each other for breaking the rules. I often get slapped on the hand for trying to push ideas in the company, but I have my teammates there, and we really support each other in bringing new ideas forward. Our culture is also just defined by the speed, the ability to fail, the openness, and also this internal and external world that we live in, where we're both having one foot in the ecosystem with the startups and one foot in our corporate culture. Oops. Okay, this is my favorite slide. Everybody know the group on the right? Everybody know the cast of Silicon Valley? Raise your hand if you watch Silicon Valley. Okay, so this is very much who walks in our doors. And then on the left is our AT&T leadership team, our executive team. So kind of different, right? And the way they dress, and the way they're sitting, and right, and the approach. So the strategy is the game plan. So how are we going to get there? How are we going to mix these two groups up together? And we really try and connect our stakeholders with an informed point of view. And what this means is when we go to the ecosystem and to startups, they make a lot of assumptions about AT&T. Oh, you guys are trying to optimize your call centers, right? No. We want our customers to connect with us on digital channels. We're not expanding our call centers. So we go in with an informed point of view. And the same hand to our stakeholders inside the company, when they want to learn more about anything as small as a phone trade-in, and they come to us saying, what are some new technologies in phone trade-ins? How can we make this a better customer experience? Then we go and bring them resources from the external ecosystem, and again, with an informed point of view. Sometimes it's something larger, like the future of drones. We had drone makers, innovators, big partners like the FCC and NASA coming and knocking on our door and telling us what they needed from AT&T. So we came with that informed point of view and went into the company and said, here's the point of view that we've created in talking to our partners. This is what they need from us. And likewise, now we're doing that where we've created, which I'll share at the end a little bit more about, the future of drones according to the AT&T Foundry, where now we're taking our position and our point of view on what the future of drones looks like and sharing that back externally with the ecosystem. So we have some strategies around doing that and making sure that we're connecting and we're creating alignment. All right, so our approach to work. We have a bias towards action, and this is one of the hardest things to change at AT&T, because we want to be prepared, precise, we want to have all those dashboards green. So we don't pull something out of the pipeline without trying it. And if we have an idea, we just go. We just put something out there and get some feedback. It's very exploratory, and we really have this bias towards action that plays out in our rapid prototyping. We have a 12-week sprint cycle so that we can pretty much try anything. And we really leverage the ecosystem in our thinking, in who we're partnering with. And oftentimes we'll work better with that startup because we have this bias towards action. Some examples, this is what prototyping often looks like. These are some wireframes. And this is one that we did for our network services team. They just wanted to understand what AT&T's role was in security. And in talking to customers, we found that, oh, AT&T is in charge of the security on my phone, or I don't really think of AT&T as that way. It's really my OS and really the maker of my hardware that I think of as responsible for my security. So we're about to go on a whole journey towards creating a product that customers would have to pay for, but now we learned very quickly through some rapid prototyping that they don't want to pay for AT&T to take care of their security, at least on a customer level. But we did learn that in a business setting with business customers, we play a different role with that audience. So just with some quick prototyping, we were able to get some answers to move forward with and create a point of view. And innovation I kind of consider a hall pass to imperfection. You're just trying to get something out there. So make sure if you take anything away today that innovation doesn't happen overnight. But if you take the time to just put some ideas out there and show them something even very, very low res, you can get some feedback and get some information to move forward on. A symbol of this bias to action is that we use these one-page inception documents to talk about our objectives and how we want to shape a project rather than a 2-year development cycle. I get asked, but doesn't that sacrifice quality? Actually, you become more tied to your product, to your idea, and it becomes outdated in a 2-year cycle. And I have many stories about trying to convince business units to introduce an idea from the outside and use it as a benchmark rather than just saying, no, let's ignore what's happening on the outside and move forward with our 2-year, which is probably more like 5-year product cycle. Projects as a catalyst. So we're not just an innovation center, we're AT&T's innovation center. We always try and get business unit sponsorship for a project, so we ensure that the work can be absorbed back into the business. Sometimes it's something very small, where we create a connected car platform a few years ago, and then it's a whole connected car business unit. Sometimes it's something a little bit bigger, like with our IoT business unit, or big data, where we were starting to experiment in those spaces, and now they're their own business units. So there's a few ways that this plays out as a catalyst. So we're not trying to create a new product where then the Foundry is hosting the sales center and the call center. We're just trying to be the catalyst towards some new thinking and approaches and ideas. This, I think, is another one that for many of you is a great takeaway. Our engagement with disruptors, startups, innovators, and we really play the role of a translator and a guide. So many times we'll have our founders or startup leaders come in and pitch to the AT&T teams. And it'll go like this. The AT&T team will say, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm part of the Stanky organization, and this is who my boss is. And the startup leader's like, I don't understand. What's your role? What do you do in this company? But that's very much a part of our AT&T culture, is that we forget sometimes that people don't work with us because we're so used to being an internal-facing organization and not used to partnering with the external ecosystem. And then the startup founder will say, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm a former Google, or I'm former Apple. And what that does for the person in the AT&T chair who's been working at the company for 30 years is create some kind of distance and unrelatability between the two groups. So what we'll do is we'll help the coach both sides. So we'll meet with the business unit leader or the team that we're about to pitch to and ask them a little bit deeper about what are your gaps, what are your problems, what kind of insights are you looking for. In the same way, we'll, if it's something about design thinking, we'll give them some good questions to ask about design thinking, so that they're not just jumping to ROI, but that they're also looking at other bits of information and insights they can pull out of the meeting. We will also often position the startup leader as an advisor. So it's not always a hard pitch where they're trying to sell something into the company, which our culture does not really absorb very well. So we'll say to the business unit leader, we're bringing in the startup founder. They have an expertise in phone trade-ins or VR or augmented reality or AI, and we just thought that this could be really helpful in building your strategy. And so there's a little bit more comfortability in that approach And for the business unit side, for the founder side, we tell them a little bit more about who their audience is and guide them towards don't spend 50% of your presentation explaining that there is a problem. That's a pitch to a VC. You're talking to someone who knows they have a problem. So spend more of your time talking about how they can implement it practically into their business unit. Finally, two more here that are kind of under one umbrella, but we provide a platform to startups and other innovators to talk about the future of technology. So we're giving them an opportunity to share a meaningful voice in that innovation conversation that's critical for a technology brand in particular. And so we serve as that front door for AT&T in Silicon Valley and for the global startup community. One of the biggest ways that we do that is through a program called FutureCast. So if you go to futurecastseries.com, you can see a collection of videos. We do 6 of these a year, and essentially we host a conversation so we're having one actually in New York. If any of you are in New York next week, we're hosting that on the power of fintech-enabled experiences. We just had one on entertainment earlier this year with Young Guru, Jay-Z's sound engineer, on content creation. We've had past discussions with Ben Jealous, who is a VC for minority-led companies, on investing for inclusion and the power and the hustle of minority-led companies. We've also had Steve Case talk about the different innovation hubs and what it means to have innovation hub capabilities. We've had the science fiction of Silicon Valley with David Hornick. He's a VC leader. So what this does is help AT&T create a point of view, but it also brings innovators onto our platform to talk about the future of technologies, because we want to be fuel for the innovation that's being built on our network, and we want to use our brand to create reflected glory. So this is one of the most fun parts of my job, is meeting with all these innovators, and it's often how we source and create an experiential brand and kind of give people a piece of our culture at the Foundry. And we've taken it on the road to a few different locations and innovation hubs. So finally, partnerships. This is just about being a better partner than we once were, being a friendly open door. Telecom has a legacy of often being closed and slow moving. And so one of our objectives is to forge these strategic partnerships. And it's really built into our DNA. Like I said, we have Ericsson, Cisco, all these partners that have put in money to help fund this innovation center so that we can try things, move forward. And one of the most exciting ways that we've done this with Ericsson and with an organization called Rocket Space is launch our first thought leadership piece, The Future of Drones, according to the AT&T Foundry. So with that, I'm going to end sharing one of my favorite moments from this past year. We had a developer summit, which we have every year in Las Vegas. And we had Ehrlich from the show Silicon Valley as one of our comedians. And he plucked me out of the audience. Somehow he knew, he's like, who has one of the most difficult to describe jobs? And I was sitting with our vendors and our startups and our partners, and everyone was pointing to me. So I told him that it's very much like the show Silicon Valley. But in going through the process of a 5-year organization that's growing, that's constantly trying to change and push the envelope for our company, I've learned a lot, and so have many of my teammates. So I hope this framework of these 9 indicators gives you something to go back to your own organization with. And if you have any questions, if you didn't think I was a rebel before, my email is truth@att.com. So you're welcome to email me. And like I said, if you're in New York and want to come to our program, let me know. If you're ever in Palo Alto, feel free to shoot me a note as well. Thank you.
I think we have time for one question right before. Does anyone have a burning question? Well, first of all, let's just thank Ruth and Tony. Let's see, does anyone have a burning question that they want to ask? We got a mic runner? If not, I have one. Okay. All right, and as you can see, I'm innovating. I went from 5x8 note cards to a big piece of 8.5 by 11 paper to now writing my notes on my iPhone. So it's happening right before your eyes. One question I have for both of you. Okay. we have folks in the room that come from industries that might be highly regulated, right? Like maybe HR, or there's processes and procedures that you may have to think about as you're creating and driving new processes and products. How would you help people in those positions understand the power of innovation in maybe the HR suite, or how you can translate innovation into something on the finance team? How do you help people kind of understand what their role is in innovation and make it speak to them?
That's a really good question. Yeah, having come from that background a little bit, you're working within some constraints, and so you can't change policies, rules, or regulations, but how you work together offers a huge opportunity to innovate. So sometimes it's less about changing how we innovate around our products and services, but how we function together. There's an opportunity to create some creativity and innovation just from I would say, how we get work done. And so if there's chances to change your products, which a lot of it is regulated, you really can't. But how do we work together to create a better customer experience is an area that you can always innovate around.
I was going to say the same thing about all having constraints, and I know that there's a perception within AT&T that we supposedly have so much money and huge budgets, and but it's, the reality is not really like that. And what we do is we open our doors to regulators and invite them into the discussion. Like I said, many of the FutureCast discussions are about how to create a path towards innovation. So we invite those partners into the conversation with us to help show them this is what innovation looks like, this is why we need it. And then going back to my point about having a bias for action and just getting some tests out there, there are ways, even with regulations, let's just say you're trying to hire for a certain type of position, and or you're trying to communicate information across your organization. We always just say, just try with a small experiment. Right now we're doing something where we're trying a new way to create business unit alignment, where we once created a big forum for a leader to come and share ideas with us, and we're trying something a little bit more bite-sized and flexible that can be a little more collaborative. And so at first there were a lot of rules and regulations about sharing that we had to get over, but when we approached it as we're just trying this experiment, we just want to put something out there, let's see what kind of rules it breaks, what kind of feedback we get. And it's a hard journey, and it requires a lot of persistence and patience to work around the rules. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
That's it? Yeah, great. All right, so that presentation there is really what gets me going in the morning, just finding new ways to work together. And I love the product side innovation, but what I've heard just from our conversations yesterday with some of our best companies is that it's not always, like they mentioned, it's not always about the product that you're creating. It's about radical collaboration, right, within your groups. So if you can take anything back from what we talked about during this session, I think what Ruth landed on is the way to go, that it's about small experiments. Sometimes you don't need to get everybody's permission. How can you just incrementally push the ball along and get some data, get something to sort of justify your case, and then hopefully you could get another big win out of that. So thank you. So this is going to be a fun part, right? I know that I heard some bellies grumbling as I was walking up to the front. We're going to have a facilitated networking lunch. All right. So what that means is that we're going to invite you to go into the Capitol Ballroom A through D, which is right through those doors, and we're going to give you a number as you go in. So you're not going to be able to sit with your buddies during this hour. You're going to be mixed up a bit in the spirit of innovation and cross-pollination. So make sure you get your number to where you're going to sit. Grab your food, and about 25 minutes into the lunch, then Ed and I think Lorena Martinez, who's also a consultant with Great Place to Work, will begin this facilitated lunch discussion. So we're always about making sure you get all the value that you can. Meet back here at 1:45. We're going to have a best workplaces leader panel that I'll be facilitating. So have a great lunch, and I'll see you back here in a little over an hour.